On 14th of July 1944, near Saint-Lô, France, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley watched a Sherman tank accelerate toward a Normandy hedgerow. For 6 weeks, bocage terrain had cost First Army 3,000 casualties per week. The tank struck the ancient earthen wall at 10 miles per hour. Its welded steel tusks bit into tangled roots. The Sherman pushed through, belly protected, gun level. Bradley later wrote he watched in awe as the hedgerow exploded to make way. The device weighed 60 pounds, fabricated from German beach obstacles by Sergeant Curtis Culin of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron. Within 2 weeks, 500 tanks would carry identical modifications. The innovation came not from Engineering Corps or British technical divisions, but from a 29-year-old tanker from Cranford, New Jersey. Records show the bocage had already consumed more American tanks than German panzers had destroyed. By early July 1944, American forces occupied a coastal strip 30 miles deep. The 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions had taken 35 days to advance 7 miles from Omaha Beach. Casualty rates exceeded those recorded at the Somme in 1916. The Breakout Corps faced hedgerow country, extending 50 miles inland, terrain the French called bocage. Intelligence reports had noted the landscape, but failed to calculate its tactical cost. Earth embankments averaged 4 feet high, crowned with tangled hawthorn, oak, and beech. Root systems penetrated 6 feet deep. Each field measured roughly 300 feet across. The irregular patchwork created kill zones where German machine gun teams waited in foxholes dug directly into hedge walls. Overhead artillery fire proved ineffective against these positions. Tank battalions discovered the terrain's peculiar physics. Sherman tanks attempting to climb over hedgerows exposed their belly armor, barely 2 inches thick. Panzerfaust teams positioned in adjacent fields destroyed 14 tanks from the 747th Tank Battalion in a single afternoon engagement near La Haye-du-Puy. After-action reports documented the pattern: tank climbs embankment, gun barrel elevates skyward, undercarriage presents target, shaped charge penetrates. Combat engineers tried explosives. 2 50-pound charges could blast a gap, but the process consumed 30 minutes and drew immediate mortar fire. Bulldozer tanks, Shermans, fitted with earth-moving blades, worked effectively but stood out. German artillery targeted them first. Each battalion possessed only 4 dozer tanks. By 10th of July, the 2nd Armoured Division had lost 3 of its 12 dozers. General Bradley's staff calculated that at current rates, reaching the Avranches crossroads would require 16 more weeks. The 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron occupied positions 2 miles south of Carentan. Sergeant Curtis Culin commanded a tank in Troop F. His service record showed enlistment in the New Jersey National Guard in 1936. The unit, known as the Essex Troop, had trained for reconnaissance missions, not sustained combat in agricultural terrain. Cullen's crew included Corporal James Roberts from Tennessee, who serviced the tank's 75mm gun, Private Eugene Walsh, loader, and Private Donald Pierce, driver. They had survived 38 days of contact without losing a crew member. Their Sherman, designated F7, carried standard armament and armor. Weight 33 tons, maximum speed 25 miles per hour on roads, significantly less in bocage. On 5th of July, during a maintenance halt near Saint-Jean-de-Day, Roberts watched engineers prepare explosives for the next hedgerow breach. He asked why they couldn't weld saw teeth to the tank's bow and cut through. The comment drew laughter. Culin did not laugh. That evening he sketched designs in a field notebook. Tank crews throughout Normandy were improvising. The 79th Infantry Division had mounted crude cutting bars by 5th of July. The 19th Corps demonstrated prongs designed initially for explosive placement. The 747th Tank Battalion's Lieutenant Charles Green welded railroad ties to create a ramming device. None proved entirely satisfactory. Culin's design used 4 steel prongs, each roughly 2 feet long, arranged horizontally across the Sherman's bow. The key innovation lay in their downward angle, which would pin the tank's weight against the embankment rather than lift the bows skyward. The steel would come from German beach obstacles, the Czech hedgehogs scattered across Omaha and Utah beaches. He presented sketches to Captain Richard Mason on 7th July. Mason forwarded the design to Major James Thompson, commanding officer of the 102nd. Thompson authorized a prototype using scrap metal from a captured German roadblock. Unit mechanics welded the assembly in 6 hours. On 9th July at 0640 hours, Culin's Sherman approached a hedgerow south of the squadron's position. The tank accelerated to 10 miles per hour. Pierce maintained steady throttle. The tusks struck the embankment. Roots tore. The Sherman's weight drove the prongs downward, preventing the bow from rising. Dirt and vegetation exploded upward as the tank burst through. The gun remained level throughout the maneuver. Time elapsed 12 seconds. Thompson ordered immediate testing against thicker hedgerows. By noon, F-7 had penetrated 8 separate embankments without exposing vulnerable armor. The device bent, but did not break. Crews from other platoons gathered to observe. Word reached division headquarters by 1400 hours. Major General Edward Brooks, commanding the 2nd Armored Division, arrived on 10th July. He witnessed 3 demonstrations. His operations officer, Colonel Maurice Rose, noted that the device weighed approximately 60 pounds, light enough for field installation, heavy enough for structural integrity. Rose recommended immediate mass production. General Brooks telephoned V Corps headquarters. Lieutenant General Leonard Gero drove to the 2nd Armored Division's position on 12th July. He's brought Bradley. Bradley's memoir recorded the moment precisely. The tank backed off and charged at 10 miles per hour. Its tusks bored into the wall, pinned down the belly, and pushed through under a canopy of dirt. Bradley asked who designed it. Gero identified Sergeant Culin. Bradley ordered production of as many units as materiel permitted. The 2nd Armored Division's Ordnance Company began fabrication that afternoon. Steel came from beach obstacles. German forces had emplaced thousands of Czech hedgehogs along the Atlantic Wall. Removal teams had stockpiled them at supply depots. By 15th July, engineers had measured and photographed Culin's device from 6 angles. Technical drawings reached 1st Army headquarters. Bradley's staff calculated requirements. 1st Army possessed approximately 2,000 Sherman tanks. If 60% received the modification, 1,200 devices would be needed. Each required 40 to 60 pounds of steel and 4 hours of welding time. The 111th Ordnance Battalion, stationed near Isigny-sur-Mer, received fabrication orders on 16th July. Lieutenant Colonel Walter Tardy commanded the unit. His after-action report documented production methods. Welders worked in teams of 3. One team could complete 5 devices per day. The battalion assigned 30 teams to the project. Steel arrived in truck convoys from beach depots. Czech hedgehogs were sectioned with cutting torches. Specifications required prongs of hardened steel, tapered at penetration points. Each assembly included mounting brackets compatible with Sherman hull configurations. Quality control became critical. Weak welds meant combat failure. Tardy instituted inspection protocols. Each finished device underwent stress testing under 5-ton loads. Rejection rate held at 4%. Other ordnance units joined production. The 3rd Ordnance Battalion fabricated devices for the 29th Infantry Division's attached tank battalion. The 7 Corps Ordnance Company supplied the 4th Infantry Division. By 20th of July, production reached 40 units per day across 1st Army's support network. Installation required 4 soldiers and 2 hours. The devices bolted to existing hull fittings. No structural modification of the tank itself was necessary. This meant removal and reinstallation for different terrain remained practical. Culin's crew received their permanent installation on 17th in July. The device showed wear from testing but remained structurally sound. Pierce noted the additional weight barely affected handling. The Sherman's Chrysler engine, producing 400 horsepower, compensated easily. Tank crews began calling the modified Shermans Rhinos. The nickname spread rapidly. By 22nd July, 1st Army intelligence reports referenced Rhino tanks in operational summaries. The term appeared in radio traffic despite no official designation. Bradley ordered operational security. No Rhino tank would engage before Operation Cobra's launch. Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy, was scheduled for 24th of July. Weather postponed it to 25th of July. The operation would employ concentrated air bombardment, followed by armoured exploitation. The 2nd and 3rd Armoured Divisions would lead the advance. The 2nd Armoured Division received 200 Rhino devices. Installation proceeded through 23rd of July. The division's organic tank strength stood at 232 Shermans. Approximately 90% would carry the hedgerow cutters. The 3rd Armoured Division received 180 devices. The 4th Armoured Division, held in reserve, would receive installations during the advance. Infantry divisions attached tank battalions received priority allocation. The 747th Tank Battalion, supporting the 1st Infantry Division, equipped 40 of its 54 operational Shermans. The 743rd Tank Battalion, assigned to the 30th Infantry Division, equipped 38 of 49 tanks. These units would spearhead Cobra's initial assault. Crews trained in rear areas. The 2nd Armoured Division established a practice course south of Colombière. 20 hedgerows marked the route. Tank platoons ran timed trials. Experienced commanders noted that speed mattered less than angle of approach. Striking the embankment squarely distributed force evenly across all prongs. Glancing blows could bend individual tusks. Maintenance crews carried spare prongs. Combat damage would require field replacement. Welding equipment accompanied each company's supply train. Major General Rose, now commanding officer of the 3rd Armoured Division, emphasized that the Rhino device was equipment, not a guarantee. Proper tactics, infantry tank coordination, suppressive fire, artillery support remained essential. German intelligence remained unaware of the innovation. Aerial reconnaissance could not detect the modifications. The devices appeared identical to standard Sherman frontal armour from above. This represented a deliberate operational advantage. 1st Army's tactical surprise would compound the strategic surprise of Cobra's massive air bombardment. On 24th of July, Bradley visited the 2nd Armoured Division's assembly area. He spoke to Culin's crew. Corporal Roberts mentioned his initial suggestion. Bradley asked why it took 5 weeks to implement. The answer lay in bureaucracy, scarcity of information, and the difficulty of recognizing field innovations. Bradley made no comment in his written record. That evening, forecast conditions improved. Cobra would proceed at 09:38 hours on 25 July. The bombing began at 09:38 hours on 25th of July 1944. Heavy bombers from the 8th Air Force struck German positions south of the Perrier-Saint-Lô road. Medium bombers followed. Fighter bombers completed the sequence. Total tonnage delivered 4,000 tons. The bombardment killed approximately 1,000 German soldiers and destroyed much of the defending Panzer Lehr Division's equipment. Short bombing killed 111 American soldiers and wounded 490. Among the dead was Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in Europe. The casualties delayed but did not halt the operation. At 1100 hours, infantry advanced. The 9th and 30th Infantry Divisions attacked through the bombardment zone. Progress was slower than planned. Surviving German strongpoints maintained resistance. Tank infantry coordination faltered in some sectors. The 2nd Armoured Division committed elements on 26 July. Combat Command A pushed toward Cannassy. Rhino tanks led each armoured column. Hedgerow after hedgerow disintegrated under steel tusks. German troops, expecting the usual slow penetration, found American armour suddenly mobile. Reports from the 66th Armoured Regiment documented the change. Advancing 4 miles on 26th July, the regiment encountered 47 hedgerows. Before Rhino devices, such terrain would have consumed days. With the cutters, transit time decreased by 70%. The regiment lost 3 tanks to mechanical failure, 2 to mines, none to exposure while crossing embankments. Combat Command. B reached Saint-Gilles by evening. The advance had covered 6 miles in 12 hours. Exceptional pace for bocage fighting. German forces attempted to establish defensive lines, but could not predict where American tanks would breach. Tank commanders reported that the Rhino device created its own tactical problem. Infantry had difficulty keeping pace. Tanks broke through hedgerows into open fields where German anti-tank teams waited. Close infantry support remained essential. By afternoon of 26 July, tank infantry radio communications had improved. Infantry learned to follow immediately behind breaching tanks, suppressing enemy positions before anti-tank weapons could engage. The 3rd Armoured Division joined the exploitation on 27th July. Its Combat Command B drove toward Coutances. The advance achieved 8 miles despite continued German resistance. American commanders noted increasing numbers of abandoned German vehicles. Fuel shortages were crippling German mobility. By 28th July, the breakthrough was undeniable. The 2nd Armoured Division reached Coutances. The 1st Infantry Division's progress accelerated. Even the 29th Division, which had struggled since D-Day, gained 5 miles in 2 days. German forces began withdrawing. The static battle of attrition was ending. Mobile warfare had resumed. The Rhino tanks contributed to a psychological shift. American crews, demoralized by weeks of immobility, regained confidence. They possessed a tool that worked. The innovation belonged to them. A sergeant's idea, fabricated from enemy steel, installed by their own mechanics. Morale reports from tank battalions noted the change. German commanders struggled to adapt. SS Obersturmbannführer Rudolf von Ribbentrop, commanding the 3rd Company, 1st SS Panzer Division, wrote in his war diary that American tanks were penetrating positions without warning. Traditional bocage tactics, waiting for tanks to expose themselves climbing embankments, no longer applied. The advance reached operational tempo on 30 July. The 4th Armoured Division, finally committed, drove toward Avranches. Lieutenant General George Patton's 3rd Army would become operational on 1st August. The narrow Pontobo, crossing near Avranches, would funnel American forces into Brittany and southeastern France. Tank losses during Cobra's first 6 days totaled 112 Shermans across 1st Army. Operational research later determined that 38% resulted from mines, 24% from anti-tank guns, 19% from Panzerfausts, 12% from mechanical failure, and 7% from friendly fire. 0 losses were attributed to exposure while crossing hedgerows. Before Rhino devices, approximately 15% of tank losses occurred during embankment crossings. The 2nd Armoured Division's maintenance records showed minimal damage to the devices themselves. 11 required replacement after repeated use bent prongs beyond repair. 6 were lost when tanks were destroyed. None failed structurally during use. The steel from Czech hedgehogs proved adequate for the application. Culin continued operations with the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron. On 3rd August, near Mortain, his squadron provided screening for the 30th Infantry Division when German forces launched Operation Lüttich, a counterattack toward Avranches. The squadron's after-action report made no special mention of Culin or the device he designed. The broader strategic picture emerged in early August. Operation Cobra had created conditions for the Falaise encirclement. German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army faced potential annihilation. American, British and Canadian forces were converging. The bocage, which had protected German forces, now trapped them. American mobility owed much to the Rhino tank. Patton's Third Army swept through Brittany and southeastern France. The 4th and 6th Armoured Divisions, both equipped with hedgerow cutters, achieved advances unthinkable in June. On 8th August, the 4th Armoured Division covered 37 miles in daylight hours. British and Canadian forces employed similar devices. The Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers produced 600 Mark I prongs by August. These were fitted primarily to Sherman Weisses, the British designation for M4A4 Shermans. An additional 1,000 Mark II prongs followed. Churchill tanks, with their superior climbing capability, required fewer modifications, but some received prongs regardless. The Falaise pocket closed on 23rd August. Estimates varied, but approximately 50,000 German soldiers were captured. 10,000 died. The German 7th Army effectively ceased to exist. Allied tank losses during the encirclement battle were significant. British forces lost approximately 400 tanks between 18 and 21 August during Operation Goodwood and its aftermath, but the German armoured force in Normandy was destroyed. Of approximately 2,300 German tanks and assault guns committed to Normandy, only 100 to 120 crossed the Seine at the campaign's end. The contribution of the Rhino tank to this outcome was indirect but substantial. By restoring mobility to American armour in late July, it enabled the operational manoeuvre that created encirclement conditions. German forces, expecting static fighting to continue, found themselves outflanked and surrounded. Post-battle analysis by Army Ground Forces headquarters noted multiple factors: overwhelming air superiority, artillery concentration, numerical superiority in tanks and personnel, superior logistics. The report mentioned the Rhino device in a single paragraph. It concluded that tactical innovation by junior ranks had proved significant, but was not decisive by itself. Combined arms coordination mattered more than individual equipment improvements. This assessment, while accurate, understated the device's psychological impact. On 28 August, Allied forces liberated Paris. German forces had withdrawn across the Seine. The Normandy campaign was complete. Casualty figures were becoming clear. British and Canadian forces suffered approximately 83,000 casualties, including 16,000 killed. American forces suffered approximately 124,000 casualties, including 20,000 killed. German casualties exceeded 400,000, with over 200,000 captured. Tank losses reflected the campaign's intensity. Allied forces lost approximately 4,000 tanks. German records, incomplete and contradictory, suggested losses between 481 and 2,300 armoured vehicles. The disparity in reporting reflected Germany's collapsing record keeping and the difficulty of distinguishing between destroyed, abandoned, and captured vehicles. Sergeant Culin received the Legion of Merit on 3rd September. The citation read, "For exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services." Sergeant Culin devised and developed a hedgerow cutting device which was fitted to the front of medium tanks and enabled them to cut through the heavy hedgerows of Normandy, France. This invention was of inestimable value in facilitating the rapid advance of armoured elements and contributed materially to the success of Allied operations in France. General Bradley mentioned Culin in his memoir, published in 1951. President Eisenhower referenced the innovation in a 1964 television interview with Walter Cronkite, calling it an example of American ingenuity. Historians subsequently debated its significance. Some called it decisive. Others noted that multiple innovations, fighter-bomber tactics, improved infantry-tank coordination, artillery concentration, occurred simultaneously. The truth lay between extremes. The Rhino device solved a specific problem efficiently. It did not revolutionize warfare. It enabled armor to operate in terrain that had previously neutralized it. This was sufficient. Wars are won by incremental advantages accumulated systematically. The British produced 1,500 prongs total. American production reached approximately 750 devices. After the breakout from Normandy, their utility diminished. Open terrain in eastern France did not feature hedgerows. The devices were removed, and the steel was recycled. Culin's original prototype, mounted on Sherman F-7, survived the war. The 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron reached the Elbe River in April 1945. Culin returned to the United States in September 1945. Technical analysis of the Rhino device continued after the war. Army ground forces conducted efficiency studies. The findings were straightforward. A 60-pound steel attachment requiring 4 hours to install and no modification to the tank itself had increased mobility by approximately 70% in bocage terrain. No other single modification achieved comparable results at such low cost. The innovation's broader significance lay in its origin. Military institutions invest heavily in research and development. Purpose-built vehicles, Churchill AVREs, DD tanks, mine flails had consumed years of engineering effort. Yet the solution to the bocage problem came from a cavalry sergeant observing an engineer's difficulty. Military historian Max Hastings later noted that Culin credited Corporal Roberts with the initial idea. Roberts's offhand comment, "Why don't we get some saw teeth?" contained the essential insight. Culin transformed comment into design, design into prototype, prototype into production article. Both men contributed. Publicity favored Culin. This was probably inevitable. Roberts returned to Tennessee and worked in lumber mills until his death in 1987. Culin worked for Schenley Industries in New York until his death in 1963. The device entered doctrinal literature slowly. Field Manual, 1733, The Armored Battalion, published in 1949, included a single paragraph on hedgerow cutting devices. The manual noted that such equipment had proved useful in specific terrain, but should not be considered standard. This reflected institutional thinking, special equipment for special circumstances, not systematic innovation. Soviet military observers studied the Normandy campaign extensively. Their analysis noted American adaptability, but criticized reliance on material solutions. Soviet doctrine emphasized aggressive maneuver and combined arms coordination. The hedge cutter represented, in their view, an American preference for technical fixes over tactical skill. This was partly fair criticism, partly ideological positioning. The device itself became museum artifact. Examples survive at the US Army Ordnance Museum and the Tank Museum at Bovington. The steel prongs appear crude, almost primitive when viewed outside operational context. This was part of their genius. Sophisticated engineering was unnecessary. The solution needed only to work under combat conditions. It worked. By September 1944, Allied forces had advanced to the German border. The rapid pursuit following the Normandy breakout had consumed resources. Supply lines stretched from Normandy ports to positions 400 miles east. Fuel shortages halted Patton's advance. Montgomery's Operation Market Garden, an attempt to cross the Rhine through the Netherlands, failed in late September. The war would continue 8 more months. Germany would deploy new weapons, V-2 rockets, jet fighters, Type Wehrend U-boats. None altered strategic outcomes. Germany's position was terminal after Normandy. The Eastern Front consumed divisions faster than they could be replaced. Allied air superiority eliminated mobility. The Normandy campaign demonstrated that adaptability mattered more than initial planning. Allied planners had overlooked bocage terrain's tactical significance. This oversight might have proved catastrophic. Instead, field innovation compensated for planning failure. Multiple junior officers and enlisted personnel developed solutions. Culin's device succeeded because it was simple, cheap, and effective. Organizational lessons emerged slowly. The US Army established formal innovation channels after the war. Junior personnel were encouraged to submit tactical improvements. Research and development entities increased engagement with field units. These reforms acknowledged that technological superiority alone was insufficient. The capacity to adapt and innovate operationally mattered equally. Curtis Culin never sought public attention. He declined interview requests after the war. When contacted by military historians in the 1950s, he emphasized that many people had contributed to solving the bocage problem. His role, he insisted, was limited to one specific device. This modesty was characteristic. His service record showed competence and reliability, not ambition. The 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron was inactivated in 1946. Veterans reunions continued into the 1990s. Culin attended when possible. He died in Manhattan in 1963, aged 48. Obituaries noted his wartime service, but did not mention the hedgerow cutter. His Legion of Merit citation survived in official records. The device he designed solved a tactical problem that had threatened operational success. This was sufficient contribution. The Normandy campaign required thousands of such contributions, from logistics officers ensuring fuel delivery to infantry squads, clearing German strongpoints. Culin's innovation was one thread in a complex fabric. Records preserved at the US Army Heritage and Education Center document the hedgerow cutter's operational impact. Tank battalions equipped with the device achieved advance rates 60 to 70% faster than those without it during late July 1944. This translated to concrete operational advantage during the 10 days when American forces exploited Cobra's breakthrough. The innovation's broader significance lies in what it reveals about military adaptation. Large organizations struggle to incorporate field innovations rapidly. The US Army in 1944 possessed extensive research infrastructure. The Ordnance Department employed thousands of engineers. Tank development programs consumed millions of dollars, yet the solution to an immediate tactical problem came from a 29-year-old sergeant. This pattern repeated elsewhere in Normandy. Sailors improvised Hedgehog anti-submarine rockets for shore bombardment. Engineers developed specialized charges for bunker demolition. Infantry squads modified weapons for close-quarters combat. The aggregate effect of these small innovations proved decisive. German forces faced the opposite problem. Their tactical doctrine was sophisticated, their equipment often superior, but their capacity for rapid adaptation had atrophied. Rigid command structures and ideological constraints prevented field innovation from spreading quickly. When American tanks suddenly breached hedgerows efficiently, German defenders could not develop counter-tactics quickly enough. The statistical record is clear. During June and early July, American forces in Normandy averaged 1 mile of advance per week. After Operation Cobra began on 25 July, advance rates exceeded 5 miles per day. Multiple factors contributed: air superiority, artillery concentration, German exhaustion. But mobility was essential. Armor that could maneuver in bocage terrain could exploit opportunities that armor stuck behind hedgerows could not. British historian Max Hastings wrote that the Rhino tank exemplified American military character: practical, improvisational, focused on results rather than elegance. The device was indeed inelegant. It was also effective. This combination defined much of American equipment and doctrine. The Sherman tank itself followed the same pattern: mechanically reliable, easy to produce, individually inferior to German heavy tanks, but available in overwhelming numbers. The lesson for military institutions remains relevant. Technical sophistication matters less than adaptability to conditions. The capacity to recognize and implement field innovations quickly can determine operational outcomes. 20 years after Normandy, Eisenhower reflected on the campaign in his television interview with Cronkite. He mentioned several innovations that had proved critical: the artificial Mulberry harbors, the deception operations that convinced Germans the invasion would target Pas-de-Calais, and the Rhino tank. "The biggest and happiest group in all the Allied armies that night," Eisenhower said, referring to the successful demonstrations of the hedgerow cutter, "were those that knew that this thing worked." The comment revealed something about leadership. Eisenhower commanding millions of soldiers and coordinating operations across a theater stretching from Norway to north to Africa, recognized that tactical details mattered. A sergeant's idea could affect strategic outcomes. This recognition was itself significant. Military hierarchies often discount junior personnel's insights. The archival record contains one final document worth noting. On 15 August 1944, the 2nd Armoured Division submitted its after-action report for July operations. The report included detailed analysis of the Rhino device's performance. It concluded with a single sentence: "The hedgerow cutter has proved itself invaluable. Recommend adoption as standard equipment for all medium tanks operating in similar terrain." The recommendation was not adopted. The Army determined that purpose-built equipment for specific terrain types was inefficient. Future conflicts might occur in deserts, mountains, or urban environments. Specialized modifications for each terrain type would complicate logistics and training. This decision was probably correct from an institutional perspective, but it meant the next generation of armor officers had to relearn the lesson. When terrain nullifies equipment advantages, adaptation becomes essential. Curtis Culin's contribution to the Normandy campaign cannot be quantified precisely. How many lives did the Rhino tank save? How many days did it shorten the battle? The answers are unknowable, but the questions themselves matter. Military history focuses often on generals and grand strategy. Equipment and tactics receive less attention. Individual soldiers receive even less. Yet wars are won or lost in moments like Culin's observation that steel tusks might penetrate hedgerows. The accumulated weight of such moments, repeated across thousands of soldiers in hundreds of situations, determines outcomes. The file closed without fanfare. The numbers had already altered history.